Welcome, and thank you for joining us at our session on leading with agility. And it's really about how Merck accelerated its succession pipeline using tools around building leadership agility and leadership effectiveness. Theresa and I are really delighted to share this with you. Theresa heads learning at Merck Manufacturing, and she'll introduce herself more later. I'm a partner at Heidrick Consulting. You may know of Heidrick as a search firm, but over the past several years, a lot of firms have been acquired to build our leadership consulting business. I was the CEO of one of those firms, DSI, and my previous last 5-10 years has focused quite a bit on what differentiate those leaders who can be successful in this dramatically changing world. We've done a lot of research on the topic, and what we discovered was that agility perhaps is the single most important differentiating characteristic of leaders who really can navigate and thrive this uncertain, volatile world that we're all part of. The session is going to do three things. One, share some of that research on agility. Two, define what we mean by that in terms of real behaviors, and then bring it to life in a really important application that Theresa led with our partnership at Merck. If you look at these companies, just if you think about them, well, what do they have in common? And what would occur to you quickly is those companies are either completely gone or essentially irrelevant. Today is actually, or this week is, I think, the 10-year anniversary of Lehman Brothers' demise. And since then, many of these other companies that used to be really at the top of their game, at the top of their industry, a BlackBerry, a Blockbuster, a Kodak, they were all leading their business. And today, those same companies are actually no longer able to cope, no longer able to compete. So why is that? And when we looked at that question, we said, well, they didn't anticipate change. They didn't challenge the assumptions of the day, of their industry. They didn't shift priorities. They didn't bounce back from setbacks. In a word, they lacked agility. You all know this, but agility becomes more and more important in a world that's changing as fast as this one. And just think about 85% of the jobs that will exist in 2030, 12 years from now, have not been invented yet. In 2020, 43% of the workforce will be in a gig economy. What does that mean for learning and development, CLO roles? It means that the workforce that we are catering to, that we are supporting, is going to be just drastically a different breed than what we have today. So we have to change faster. The internet, the digital, all the changing technologies are just inundating our world. But if you look at the bottom left, 26% of companies in 2017 fell off the Fortune 500. Think about GE, which yesterday announced a new CEO and chairman. GE was the powerhouse. Just a short while ago, the #1 most admired company, and by the way, the company that was most admired for grooming leaders. But GE couldn't compete and couldn't keep pace. Now, they're still in business, but they are no longer the dominant player because the world changed faster, and GE was not able to be agile enough. So we kind of believe that, and we hear from our clients and our colleagues, that the shortage of leaders who are agile, who are transformative, is perhaps what keeps them up most at night. So we did some research at Heidrick, and over the past 3-4 years, we looked at the top performing companies in the world, the FT 500, and we essentially said, who's got the most consistent revenue growth over 3 and 7 years, so medium, short term, long term. We looked at the top 20%. Those companies had to do it without relying on acquisition, without relying on state funding, state sponsorship, and they had to do it while maintaining a certain amount of, without going too far into their profitability. So we had the rule of 20s. And when we looked at those companies and we identified the top 25 each of the past 3-4 years, then we said, what are they doing either different or better? And what we saw quickly was these very elite, high-performing organizations are doing 4 things in a differential way. Number one, these organizations are mobilizing their workforce. They are getting people energized around a purpose and a meeting, and they're focused on what they're doing with their customers and their clients, and putting the customer first. So mobilize was number one. Number two, they still have to be really strong and effective at executing the core business. We get all excited about transformation, but you still have to ride that bicycle, while you're reinventing it. And so the core, but what that means today is being able to move resources and shift priorities faster based on where they're needed. And some of these big conglomerates just have not been able to do that. Three is transform, and that's about how do you reinvent? How do you become a disruptor instead of being disrupted? And really the innovation and the challenge required to rethink your business model. And lastly, and this is the topic we're focusing on in depth today, agility. And that means the ability to pivot faster, to spot what's coming and pivot faster, to get into new markets, new customers, new solutions. And interestingly enough, if you think about or look at the research on agility, leaders who score high on agility are viewed as having greater potential to move into bigger jobs. And there's a very strong correlation, 0.56, that's high scores on agility mean you're increasingly likely to be able to move up into bigger or more diverse and different kinds of roles. So a really important thing for all of us in learning roles and leadership development roles, how do we spot those leaders and how do we groom those leaders, which is exactly what you'll hear Theresa talk about shortly. So, okay, what does agility mean? One of the things that we did in our work was we tried to get underneath a concept which we can all say we need more agility, but what does that actually mean? So we defined it and analyzed it based on our research and looking at the factors of what these companies did differently, what these leaders did differently. One is they had better foresight. They were able to have a better sense of looking further out, anticipating what was coming. Two, they were more adaptable. So it's one thing to even see what's coming. It's another thing to be able to make those shifts. And part of that means challenging assumptions. It means challenging the status quo. It means letting go of old mental models, old ways of doing business, and breaking free and adapting to newer, more progressive, more diverse, more different ways of doing things. And the thing about adaptability we've seen is organizations who look for disconfirming evidence of what they're doing, challenging their own business model, allows them to free up and be able to, in fact, adapt. Three is resilience, because if you're going to try things, experiment, shift directions, that means you're going to have success and failure. And what we saw in these leaders and these organizations is what we call resilience or bounce back ability. The ability to bounce back when you fall off that bike, because you're going to fall off. You're going to scrape your knees. You're going to have missteps and mistakes. And again, we've got to create an organization, and leaders have to set a tone that says, yeah, that's part of growing, that's part of learning, that's part of experimenting. But resilience is the ability to quickly get back on course. And last but not least, given we have an audience here of people who are in the learning professional, if we actually believe that if you had to pick one characteristic above all that's mission critical in a world that's changing rapidly like ours, it is learning. It's the ability to experiment. It's the ability to try things. It's the ability to pilot. It's the ability to fail fast, continually iterate, and continually learn. And those leaders who learn faster, who learn better, have a significant competitive advantage, if you go back to that earlier slide, in a world that's changing as rapidly as the one that we are. One quick example to bring this to life, and then we will we'll see how we took the deep dive on this topic with Merck. So read Hastings. It wouldn't surprise me if most of you know and probably consume Netflix videos. Netflix has become one of the powerhouses in our world, in our entertainment experience world over the past 10 or so years. What's interesting about Reed Hastings is is that he had the foresight to really see where video was going, and the name Netflix anticipated the whole streaming revolution, even when they were still shipping and sending DVDs to our homes. So he saw that streaming was the inevitable future, and in fact, Reed Hastings approached Blockbuster, one of the companies on that first slide, and said, "Hey, why don't we partner up? We could be your streaming partner." And Blockbuster said, again, head down, "No, people will never be interested in that." So the first thing that Netflix did, that Reed Hastings did, that we think represents this critical ability to foresight, anticipate where the industry is going, where the consumer is going. Number two is in this case is resilience, because they got to the point where they said, okay, we have the streaming option, we have the DVD option, we're going to separate our company into two, and if you want streaming, it'll be less. If you want DVD, it'll be less. It was $16 for a subscription. You could get either one for 10. But what the mistake that they made is they missed the family that wants both. And if you wanted both, it actually would become more expensive, $20. And you may or may not remember this, but this goes back about 5+ years. Netflix made this incredible mistake. Their stock price went down, I think, 60% in the course of a couple of days. They lost 80,000 consumers in a week or two. This amazing outrage. Hastings was smart enough, though, to bounce back. He said, look, my mistake, mea culpa, we screwed up, and essentially apologized and said, we missed it. We didn't realize how many of you wanted to continue with both. Again, think about the family that has parents still wanting the DVD, teenagers wanting to stream their videos. So they reduced the price for the combo, and they made it available and affordable to do both. So that was a really terrific example of resilience. That bought them a lot of loyalty, and with that they were able to then expand their business model. They were beginning to pay more and more to the for licensing costs for content, and they decided, hey, why shouldn't we go into the content business? So they ended up beginning to shift their business model and move into content. Probably the most well-known, famous, or infamous example is House of Cards. But now Netflix is almost as well-known as a content provider, a developer of video and content, as they are the vehicle by which you get to look at your favorite movies. They also have expanded into Europe, had lots, and Asia now, lots of bumps, ups and downs, but they've persevered. And learning, again, they are continuously trying things, experimenting. One of the big experiments was how people would evaluate the movies and the videos that they saw, and they're continually refining the methodologies that they're using because they're doing hundreds of experiments every day. So, and it's worked pretty nicely for Netflix. One of the most successful, business, revenue, stock market performances over the past 10 years they're in the top 10 of companies worldwide. And again, you can see it's not a completely straight line, it's ups and downs, but they continue persevering, primarily demonstrating the agility that we think is so critical. So I'm going to introduce Theresa, who's going to join and take the lead here. And I'll just mention that Theresa is one of the most agile learning leaders that we've ever met, also incredibly connected to the business and strategic, which you'll see in the way she shares how they took some of the concepts from agility and applied them in their succession program at Merck. Thank you, Theresa.
Thank you, Steve. I'm very excited to be here today to really talk about how Steve and I work together to bring these concepts of research around leadership agility into our business. As Steve said, I'm Theresa Zeller, and I am the Global Learning and Development Leader for Merck's manufacturing business. Our business has around 21,000 employees with around 60 sites around the globe, both human health and animal health sites. And so I'm happy to share with you the challenge that we faced and the opportunity that our business leaders really challenged myself and our HR team with in terms of strengthening our leader pipeline. It was clear to us that as we looked out on the horizon, we needed to accelerate the pace of our Ready Now leaders to take critical roles in our business. And so the challenge was, how do you develop that agility and how do you accelerate that talent pipeline? We really saw the need to take qualified succession candidates and not just have them develop according to the typical development pace that we would have in the organization, but to really make sure that they got ready faster. Again, our leadership saw a strong business case, actually identified it as a game changer for the business. And so our sponsor from our president, as well as from our HR team, was incredibly strong. And they worked with us throughout the entire program to ensure that we really did have a true partnership between the leadership, between the HR business partners, and between learning and development. We really did something that was, for us, really challenging. We decided that this program was going to be customized very much on the needs of the business. So what we did, in fact, was ensure that we were developing the need based on the candidates that came to us and the cohort that we put together. And we really did take an opportunity to take our current pipeline of existing programs to develop talent, as well as integrate the work that we were about to do. So let me tell you a little bit about how that happened. So first of all, the selection process was through a very rigorous succession planning. And as we got candidates in the that were really qualified through the talent pool, our HR business partners, along with our leaders and myself, sat down to say who were the right 30 candidates. Yes, 30 candidates. We would have loved to have started a little bit smaller, but we really did want to have a robust cohort. So we took those candidates, brought them into the program. One of the very first things that we did was assess where they were relative to the critical role that they were aspiring to, and which the organization felt was a role that they would be a perfect match for, or a really strong match for. And so in that way, we really looked at competency assessment, functional as well as critical or core competencies for leaders in Merck Manufacturing Division, as well as the leadership agility. We really wanted to ensure that these candidates were candidates that had the qualities that Steve just shared with you. After that assessment, there was a planning process. And what we did is we really worked with our cohort to plan a little bit differently than the way they had typically planned their career and their career moves. And we were asking them to be much more assertive and much bolder in the way that they thought about their development moving forward. And they did that based on the results of the assessment and the gaps that they saw functionally, the core competencies, as well as leadership agility. And they did that in conjunction with their managers and diagonal coaches. We all know who managers are. They're supervisors for sure. But then we also introduced a concept of diagonal coaching, where every cohort member had a leader that was minimally 1 to 2 levels above them in seniority, and typically not in their reporting chain, but to a diagonal, meaning a different aspect of the business, to give them a very different perspective. This, we believed, would help with foresight. This would help with adaptability and the like. And so it was really those diagonal coaches and the cohort member, along with the manager, that put together a development plan based on where they saw those gaps. We then took all of those development plans and we assessed them to see where did we see common needs across the cohort. What were the cohort gaps? Were there some subgroups and sub-cohort gaps, and where were there some individual gaps? And that really brings us to the micro-learning. When we mined that, we looked at the sub-cohort and the cohort level and said, what are some of the areas that we could really develop further? And for us, the list that you see here were some of the areas that we provided, what we would call micro-learnings, that would cover these needs. And so it was significant in terms of the agility framework, particularly around foresight. We did a good amount of work as well on adaptability. And you can see some of the other topics that we put in here: critical thinking, internal and external partnerships and how to build them. Networking became a really strong component of the program with our senior leadership and across the organization. Business and financial acumen, which would allow them to have that foresight and to be more adaptable, as well as really seeing an end-to-end instead of really looking at manufacturing or even the leadership of their site or their function in a silo, really being able to see how everything connected across the organization. And then we took a look at boosters, and this is really what we called boosters, was where the diagonal coach really became of benefit. And these were those personalized areas where what are some of those special assignments, developmental assignments, connections that the diagonal coach, given their position in the organization, which for us were mostly the senior leadership team or next level, what are the connections they could make, or what are the creative assignments or opportunities that they could have to fill in those other more individualized needs and really round out their development? So over time, we paced these particular components of the Succession Accelerations program together. I want to call out a couple of things on this roadmap. Number one, throughout, the cohort had monthly meetings with our president. And that was really important because these were opportunities for him to share his perspective, for them to test what they were seeing in the organization and their foresight, and to really contribute back to things that they were learning, testing, seeing, challenging, to really demonstrate their ability to adapt and really apply the business acumen they were gaining. And I also want to call out that we had a rather natural opportunity for the cohort to really build their resilience, in that we were an organization that was impacted by a cyber incident. And we didn't need to really bake a whole lot of that practice in terms of resilience, but the leaders in this cohort could take the capabilities that they had learned through the cohort and really apply them to bounce back and to really recover from what could have been and was a challenge for the organization. We brought them all back together for a capstone, so that in total there were 3 residential opportunities, and then time that they worked together in between. And then we brought them back for a capstone. And that capstone was really around helping them to pull together, to continue to work on the networking and the relationship building, and really start to think about, how do I continue to build my foresight by looking more broadly at other points of view, diverse points of view, both from differing generations as well as across the organization, folks to really understand their perspectives end to end. So let me share with you our findings. We were extremely excited that we were, as a result of a Brinkerhoff, which is an independent organization that really came in to look at the impact of our program with the cohort, we had, I think, an unprecedented 100% participation in the Brinkerhoff survey, which helps to indicate and understand the impact that the program had on each of them in their career. We also had 71% of the cohort members that had follow-on interview conversations with the Brinkerhoff team to really understand and assess the impact of the program. As a result of the impact, we were fortunate to be awarded the Silver Brandon Hall Award for Succession and Career Acceleration. And here's what we found. 47% of our cohort was either promoted to or had expanded roles within 2 years. And actually, this was at the time of the Brinkerhoff, which was 6 years prior to or 6 months prior to the closing of the program. And so I would argue, and we have seen that that number is significantly higher. 92% self-reported that they had greatly improved their time to readiness to assume those critical roles. And that meant not only did they achieve those roles, but they also felt much more ready when they got into the roles. And we do really attribute that to the 32% improvement on agility across the cohort. So we really did see those scores raise significantly, 32%, from what their original baseline was. We also saw that our senior leadership team leveraged these leaders much more, both in leader initiatives and as to really influence strategic initiatives in the organization. So they were frequently pulled into think tanks, frequently pulled into other activities to really be able to move the business forward because of their demonstrated ability to think differently. They were also more chosen for change champion type initiatives. And so there are many things as we're continuing to evolve and transform in our manufacturing the future. They have been really forefront of thinking in terms of how that will be applied and really executed, really applying a good, I would say fully the meta framework. How do we really bring that into the organization? And then some of the key learnings. 79% of our diagonal coaches were either fully or mostly engaged. That's probably one area that we would continue to grow as we move forward with this framework and this program moving forward. Where they were fully or mostly engaged, we found that 82% of the cohort said, wow, those boosters, those connections that the diagonal coaches were able to make were game changers. They were extremely differential in terms of being able to build their capability. We found that there were a couple of key success factors, a couple of things that really meant a lot. The networking was one of them, their ability to engage with the senior leaders throughout, their ability to network with each other and just pick up the phone and have the kinds of conversations they wouldn't otherwise have had. And also just from a psychological standpoint and inspiration, to have been chosen for this kind of a cohort and to have received the kind of senior level engagement and conversations and attention that they received was huge for them in terms of lifting their confidence and their capability across the organization. So in closing, I would like to thank all of you for your time and attention today. Steve Krupp and I are more than happy to continue to engage with you to talk a little bit more about either the leadership agility or how we've applied that at Merck and what we've seen. We'd certainly love to hear some of your stories and examples as well. So please don't hesitate to reach out and contact Steve at Heidrick & Struggles. Thank you for your time.